This is my 4.3 presentation by Harry Baker. So before research is carried out, it's important to think about what type of research you want to do, thinking about what the researcher wants to achieve and get out from their data, and whether numerical or written would suit their needs best. So from this you can then narrow down techniques to be suitable for analysis after collection. So when thinking about research and conducting an experiment, it is important to think about the different research designs and how some research is descriptive and observational, like the majority I'm going to talk about. However, some involve more an experimental design, which involves manipulating elements of the study, variables, or the participants. So therefore, it's very important to think about what you are trying to achieve and what method would suit you best to do that. So there are 5 types of experimental design. So the first one is experiment, and this looks at how the independent variable, which is what you're changing in the experiment, affects the dependent variable, which is what you are measuring. So an example of this for a professional gymnast would be to conduct different tests on them, then manipulate something, so change their training program, and then do the same test again and see if there's an improvements or not, or what had changed. Cross-section, so this basically involves using a range of different people that, so for example, have different ages or gender from the overall population. So in gymnastics, so it could be flexibility, so if you had 3 different groups of people at all different ages and see where they are at the start and at the end of the season. Case study, so you might study a group of athletes or an individual athlete, and you get really in-depth information from them, and this would show development over time. So example could be their emotional attitudes are qualitative data, so it could be anxiety leading up to performance, so you can see why an athlete doesn't perform as well as they should do in training, but when they come to that emotional attitude before in a performance. So comparative. So this is when 2 or more things are compared by the researcher and analysed to find out more about them. So this could be like jump heights between the UK and the USA. So what makes the difference between the two and how one's better than the other, if they are. So longitudinal. So this is a study or piece of research that will go over many years. So you look at the same variables and look for a change over time. So this could be growth of youth participation. So you could look over 3 years and measure every couple of months and see if it's changed or not and what's happened. Correlation. So this is a statistical measure of a relationship between one of more variables and give an indication of how one variable may predict another. For example, if the results go from the bottom left to the top right, there is a positive correlation, and the opposite in the negative correlation. And if the results are scattered, then there'll be no correlation. So this could be like the relationship between the height and weight of a gymnast. So that taller normally means they're heavier, and shorter normally means they're lighter. Therefore, both have a positive correlation. But we can't assume things like that. That's just a prediction. So therefore, having decided the appropriate designs for a piece of research, the researcher must then decide the detailed research methods and how data should be collected. So primary research sources. So this is data you go and collect yourself personally through methods like questionnaire researching, whereby you collect your own data firsthand. So advantages of this is direct and true, so you know exactly what you're doing. It's reliable because it is coming from you yourself, and you can control the variables because you know what you're going to change and what you don't want to change. Disadvantages are it's a risk of bias, so you could change it to suit how you want the outcome to be. It's an expensive method because you might have to use labs, and that's very expensive, and it's time consuming as you've got to do it all yourself and go through all the process yourself. So an example of this research in gymnastics was if I was to conduct my own experiment to see the intensity they're training at through a questionnaire, for example. Secondary research sources. So this is data that has already been collected by others and looking at other people's research and taking what you need from it. And this could be in forms of books or the internet, for example. So advantages of this are you could build on research, you could add lots of different research from other people together, and you could compare between others, so you could get different data and see what's different about them. and it's easy and quick, so you could just type it in the internet and find it pretty quick what you need. Disadvantages: you might not get the data you want, so it might not be exactly like the test you were testing. It might be different. It might be invalid or outdated because a lot of data on the internet is very old, and a lot of things might have changed since then, and it could have insufficient detail, so it might not exactly go into the depth that you need. And an example of this, if I was looking for information on the internet about how height affects a gymnast's performance, and from that I'd use the relevant information that I need and I found from the internet. So classifications of data. So in research there are different levels of data, and this data can take different forms, resulting in it being classified. Knowing what data you use will contribute to what tests you use and how you analyze it once it's been collected. Is discrete. This is when there is only separate, isolated or opposite values that can be achieved. So this data primarily uses closed questions like yes or no questions. For example, in gymnastics, a question might be, did you go to training last night? And that would simply require a yes or no answer. Ordinal, so this is when the data is collected in rank order, such as ascending or descending height order in gymnastics. Nominal, so this data is where you put the participants into different categories, for example height or age. So for example in gymnastics this could be putting all the girls that are 4'6" to 5 foot in one group, and then a group that are 5'1" to 5'5" in another group, and so on. So continuous, this can be ratio or interval. So this is numerical data which typically has decimal places. So there are two types, ratio and interval data. So interval data can have a negative value, and 0 is just another number, whereas ratio data has an absolute 0, and that 0 is meaningful. So an example in gymnastics for ratio data is during training and measuring their heart rate and how long it takes to increase. And for interval, an example could be temperature the gymnasts perform at, and this could go below 0 and turn negative. Qualitative data, so this is a way of collecting data which are concerned with describing meaning, so language, words, in-depth feelings and thoughts rather than statistics. So from qualitative data you're trying to get rich, detailed and personal data, and this is how you feel about a certain topic. So structured interviews, so this type of interview has a set guide that you must obey to without change regardless of the response. So advantages of this are you can focus on the topics, you just answer the set questions. They're the same questions for all participants, you can analyse between them. They're face-to-face or electronic, so it's easy to do. However, disadvantage is that you can't elaborate on questions as it's just a simple answer. Participants are forced to respond with limited choice of answers, so you just literally have to say which is the most answer you would put out of the ones they give you. And interviewers can't build rapport with the participant, it's just basically just a quick conversation with no actual meaning to it. So unstructured interviews, so these interviews have a starting topical question and then you see where the conversation goes, and it's very much interactive. So advantages of this, you can get more information as you're just talking to the person. There's greater validity as the participants are more likely to say what they want in more detail. The research can be flexible and ask follow-up questions, so you get more detail, which is good for a researcher. However, disadvantage is harder to analyse and compare between participants because they're all offering different answers, so it's hard to compare. Discussion could go off topic, so you could talk about it could go off talking about anything random, and it could take a lot of time, and it is more time consuming as you are talking about, could go on to follow-up questions and talk about different things, and it's hard to lead it back. So semi-structured interviews, so this interview type uses a mix between the two that I previously talked about. So you have some topical questions you can link to, but you can also be flexible in pursuing something, so therefore you can talk about other things before bringing the conversation back to a topical question. So advantages of this are some guidance questions for the researchers so they can compare still. There's flexibility response, so you can reply to how you want. Relevant info from questions and build on answers, so you can build on the answers. Disadvantages, you could go off topic again, talking about random things. It takes a long time because you can talk about what you want. And the researcher has to be skilled to ask follow-up questions, so they have to know what specific questions and how to probe to get the right answer they want from the interview.